Welcome everyone. Shadow Wito here. I clicked into the news and there seems to be some interesting news going on in Eastern Europe. Sky News, by the way.
This is Sky News at 9 o'clock. The headlines this evening. Russia denies claims that its missiles hit NATO member Poland, killing 2 people in a village bordering Ukraine.
This administration views NATO as one of the most important transatlantic defensive alliances out there.
As Russian missiles strike a number of cities across Ukraine, President Zelensky says an attack on Poland is a significant escalation.
There will be evidence on radar, clear evidence to see what direction these
Poland, we're monitoring the situation closely. We're in contact with our Polish friends and NATO allies. The Slovak...
Yes, I get it. What I want to do now is fix them.
Hello there, good evening. We begin then with the breaking news tonight. It's been reported that Russian missiles have killed 2 people in Poland, a member, of course, of NATO. Well, these are the latest images from the scene in Shevardov, a village near the border with Ukraine. The Associated Press news agency is quoting a senior US...
the images show it looks like emergency services going towards Prechvodov, I think that's said.
Intelligence official is saying that 2 people...
Village in eastern Poland.
...had been killed in the strikes carried out by Russia. Well, the Russian Ministry of Defense has denied that it is to blame, calling the reports a deliberate provocation in order to escalate the situation. In the last hour, the US State Department held a news briefing as Western allies insisted they were waiting for more information before deciding how to respond.
Which is why we need to keep our heads right now. When I get an update, I'll be bringing up another video.
Look, we of course are ready to stand with our NATO allies and partners, but I want to again be very.
This is. I can't see what his name is. Vedant Patel, Principal Deputy Spokesperson for the US State Department.
Very clear that we do not want to get ahead of hypotheticals. We do not know what has happened yet. We have seen reports out of Poland. They, of course, are incredibly concerning. And we're working with our partners in the Polish government and our NATO partners to get more information and to assess what has happened. We will make that determination and we will determine appropriate next steps as well.
Just to follow up, certain media quoted U.S. intelligence officials on their story. So I'm assuming that
Leon, what I can say from this podium in front of you all on camera and on the record is that we've seen these reports and that we are working with the Polish government and other partners to assess and get more information. We cannot confirm the reports of what has happened or the details, but we are working through that process to determine what happened and determine appropriate next steps.
The situation here with the defense minister putting out a short statement saying that the reports of Russian missiles landing in Poland are, quote, a deliberate provocation aimed to escalate the situation. Do you have a response to what they're saying about this?
Well, the United States is certainly not trying to escalate or incite the situation at all. And like I said, we have seen these same reports that you all have, and we are working with the Polish government to gather more information. And we are not at a point where we can confirm some of these reports that we are seeing. And that's why I'm telling you that we will determine what exactly has transpired and we will determine appropriate next steps as well. Let's go.
Well, a huge reaction certainly from European and NATO allies. Let's just bring you some of that as we look at those latest pictures from the scene. The Foreign Office spokesperson, we're investigating these reports and liaising closely with allies. Nighttime pictures now, as you can see, as the camera moves towards the location of that explosion. A NATO official too, we are closely looking into these reports linked to that blast in Poland and closely coordinating with our ally Poland. The German foreign minister, my thoughts are with Poland. We're monitoring the situation closely. We're in contact with our Polish friends and NATO allies. The Slovak Prime Minister, Edward Heger, very concerned about the explosions in Poland. The Slovak Defence Minister, Russia's recklessness is getting out of hand. Belgium's Alexander De Croo, Belgium strongly condemns the incident on Polish territory. And the Latvian Defence Minister saying that NATO could provide air defences to Poland and part of the territory of Ukraine, while it is reported by a French TV channel that France, in conjunction with its NATO allies, is carrying out a removal of doubt, an investigation to remove any suspicion about what happened and who is responsible. So let's head now to Washington, keep these pictures going as long as we can. Our US correspondent James Matthews is there. And that is absolutely critical, is it not, James, right now, before there is further response to find out exactly what happened?
Exactly, Anna. The US is saying we need hard information. They're bending over backwards to maintain a holding position on this one. President Biden, of course, is in Bali at the G20 summit, surrounded by national security advisors. We are told that there is no change in his...
There are established procedures for civil servants if they want to bring to light any issues. I'm not aware of any formal complaint about Dominic.
Not sure what happened.
Well, a spokesperson for Mr. Raab says he categorically rejects Lisa
through forensic examination.
From the States, NATO members everywhere, showing how seriously this is being taken, Siobhan.
A holding position on this one. President Biden, of course, is in Bali at the G20 summit, surrounded by national security advisors. We are told that there is no change in his...
Interesting. Very interesting.
Preserve the authority of NATO itself without tipping this into a wider extended conflict. Key to all this will be what the Russians say, of course. Should they admit an honest mistake, then that diplomatically would provide perhaps an easier route out of this, but there doesn't seem any sign of that from Moscow as of yet. So essentially, much hinges on the investigation on the ground. That will take at least a few hours, one imagines, although there is evidence on the scene. There will be evidence on radar, clear evidence to see what direction these missiles came from. So within a few hours, we should have the hard information. And for NATO, who have been talking tough, President Biden in particular, we will see in due course whether that is followed up by an appropriate action that doesn't widen the scale of this conflict inappropriately.
James, thank you. Let's head straight to Moscow then, get the view of what is happening in Russia. And certainly the Russian Ministry of Defense Telegram channel, Diana Magnay, who is there, shows no sign of a simple apology, should it be them that caused this. Their Telegram channel saying the statements of the Polish media and officials about the alleged fall of Russian missiles in the area of the settlement of Shovodov is a deliberate provocation in order to escalate the situation.
Yes, they're saying that Russian firepower launched no strikes at the area between the Polish-Ukrainian border, and that the wreckage at the scene published by Polish media bears no relation to Russian firepower. Now, I think there are a number of possibilities. One is that it was a Russian missile and that it was a deliberate targeting of a NATO country. The other is that it was a Russian missile and it was a mistake, given the fact that there was a wide-ranging and what Ukrainian officials call the biggest collective strike on Ukrainian infrastructure since the start of this war 9 months ago today. The other is that it was a Russian missile intended for a target in Ukraine that was taken down by Ukrainian air defense. Either you have remnants of the Ukrainian air defense missile that is now in Poland or the original Russian missile. And I think all of those should be possible to determine through forensic examination of the weapon systems that are on the ground, the kind of direction of travel, whether you do see Ukrainian anti-aircraft defense systems in use, A300. So I think that this will be possible to ascertain what exactly this was. You know, the Russians are essentially stating clearly this has nothing to do with them. And of course, it's very difficult to give any Russian claim at this stage in this conflict very much credibility. And it is quite possible, perhaps, that they are choosing to escalate in this way, claiming plausible deniability that this rocket attack had nothing to do with them. But it is also quite possible, as I said, that it is a mistake, or that it was a missile targeted for Ukraine, brought down by Ukrainian air defense. And at the moment, we do not know. So I think that it is important to keep very cool heads because of NATO's responsibility that an attack on one is an attack on all. They do need to be absolutely sure of the specifics around this. And I would imagine that it is possible through forensic examination of the scene to determine what happened. You know, I don't think any side wants a dramatic escalation, but at the same time, given what we have seen in recent weeks here in Russia, the loss of Kherson, the retreat which Russia is trying to paint as a way of saving Russian lives, you know, President Putin is not in a great situation 9 months into this conflict. And there has been a lot of talk of other hybrid ways in which he could escalate, whether he might go down a nuclear route, whether he might do a strike like this on NATO territory. We don't know what it could be, but I think we need to act very cautiously to determine exactly what this was. And that is clearly the NATO's approach for now.
Yes, I mean, all sorts of explanations. Daniel Fried, former US ambassador to Poland, even suggesting he'd heard it could be part of a Ukrainian interceptor, part of those air defense systems that you talked about, possibility of being a remnant part of a Russian missile which had gone astray. If it was a deliberate act, and if that can be proven, what does that say about Russia's reaction to the G20 or the G19, as President Zelensky called it, the desperation possibly of Russia, or whether they're fearful of any NATO response to what's happened?
Well, I think we're in the West often quite keen to paint every move of Russia's at this stage after the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kharkiv, now the loss of Kherson, as an act of desperation. I'm not sure that President Putin sees it that way, and I'm not sure that the Russian people see it that way. They have consistently been depicted, or this conflict for them has been depicted in any case as one against NATO, where NATO is supplying weapons to Ukraine, where NATO is controlling Ukraine like a puppet master, and where NATO's ultimate goal is to destroy Russia. So I don't think that many people in Russia would see this, and it is for the moment a limited strike if it was deliberate, as a significant escalation. But of course, President Putin and his close advisors around him know the repercussions of a strike on NATO territory. You know, is this them testing the waters for quite how far NATO is prepared to go? Is this President Putin saying, don't make a fool of me on the world stage, don't embarrass me so that I can't actually attend the G20? Because it's pretty clear that the reason he's not there is because he knows that he would be ostracized. This has happened to Sergei Lavrov, his foreign minister, on the ground there. He knows that he would have got significant repercussions at the G20 that would have been very awkward. And that is why we've seen this huge wave of missile strikes across Ukraine again today. I think it is a response. Whether this latest hit on Polish territory as part of that still remains to be seen.
Diana, with the view there from Russia, thank you very much indeed. Well, the Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki called an urgent meeting of a government committee for national security. Just getting lines now from the government spokesman, Peter Muller now. He says that they are raising the readiness of their military units. Also that there was an explosion and it did indeed kill 2 Polish citizens. And Mr. Muller going on to say that we will not answer any more questions, but they are verifying if they need to activate NATO Article 4, which is a consultation between NATO members. You remember NATO Article 5 is the one for all for one enactment of an attack on one is an attack on all, which is the backbone of NATO. But this is verifying if they need to activate NATO Article 4. This is after a National Security Council meeting in Poland itself. So let's get the latest from Siobhan Robbins, who's been monitoring the situation now from Berlin, and certainly the European reaction from the States.
So what they're debating in Poland whether or not to trigger Article 4 of NATO, which is to call a consultation with NATO as to whether or not there needs to be something done. Whereas with Article 5, is triggering Article 5 means you're going to do something.
NATO members everywhere, showing how seriously this is being taken, Siobhan.
Yeah. Yes, and I think that cautious language that you've just reported coming from the Polish government really underlines what a tense situation we are now facing. They have confirmed that there's been an explosion. What they haven't confirmed from those lines that you're reporting is what's caused that explosion. Is it indeed a Russian missile or missiles, as is being reported? To bring people up to date of what we have heard in terms of reports is that missiles or Russian missile has hit a grain store in a village on the Polish-Ukrainian border. Reports that 2 people have died, that firefighters that are at the scene. We know the Polish held this emergency meeting where we're just getting updates now. They're looking at whether they trigger Article 4 to have more discussions with their NATO counterparts. We've had some statements coming out of some of those counterparts. So NATO, for example, saying we're looking into these reports closely and closely coordinating with our ally Poland. President Zelensky of Ukraine saying we have long warned that Russian actions are not limited to Ukraine. The Russians denying this, saying that the reports of Russian missiles striking Poland are deliberate provocation to escalate the situation. Estonia calling this most alarming. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, asking for further verification work to be done to try and find out more about these explosions. And the Czech Republic saying if Poland confirms that the missiles also hit its territory, this will be a further escalation by Russia. We stand firmly behind our EU and NATO ally. And I think, you know, we've said it time and again, but that really is the key now. Was this a deliberate attack? If so, what does NATO do now? And it's very, very clear that cautious language that we're hearing coming from the Polish government, that they are having lots of behind the scenes chats to find out what the next action of them should be.
Absolutely, holding an extraordinary meeting of the National Security Bureau in Poland, and a confirmation, as Siobhan said there, from the French Defence Ministry that President Macron has asked people to carry out the necessary verification work after those explosions, what they called a removal of doubt policy. So let's get the latest then from our Defence and Security Editor, Deborah Haynes. Everybody working behind the scenes to verify what happened here, Deborah.
Yes, it's vital that they have a clear picture as to what happened, because that will dictate and determine the response. Everybody will be very, very much aware that if this was a deliberate strike by Russia on NATO soil, then that has, from the very beginning of Russia's decision to launch its war in Ukraine, which is not a member state, that has been a red line, a clear red line by all NATO allies, that should Russia put one toe, one boot, one missile on NATO soil, then that would require an Article 5, a NATO response of some sort. Now, the thing that they will also be mindful of is that given that is such a serious move, such a direct attack, a direct confrontation between the two sides, that they would have to be absolutely certain that that is indeed what happened. And like we're seeing now, the situation is confused. It's going to be key what Poland comes out and says. It's their country. They will have the best understanding as to what's happened. Of course, the US will have a clear picture too, given that satellites are focused down across the country in Ukraine, looking at every single bit of explosion and blast that goes on in that country and in the surrounding areas. So there will be a clear picture of what's happened. And then it will be the...
On screen, it's saying a Polish government spokesman confirms an explosion in the country has killed 2 people and the readiness of military units has been raised. Does not say missiles, however. Just says explosion.
The intent? Was it an accident? Was it, as Diana said, potentially Ukrainian air defense system knocking Russian missiles out of the sky and it landing in Polish territory? I think it's interesting, this talk about possibly Article 4 consultations taking place. That is all about NATO members under the treaty that all NATO members sign up to. They can have an Article 4 consultation, which is when a member state thinks that the integrity of their territory is under threat, then they will have political consultations. It's not a military step, which is Article 5. But with these things, they do require consensus. So for Article 5 to be enacted, which is an attack on one being an attack on all, the only time it's ever been enacted within the wake of the September the 11th attacks back in 2001 on the United States, it requires consensus. It requires all 30 member states to agree on the analysis and to agree that there is this collective threat and then to respond. And so that is why you are going to see very slowly, not slowly, but very careful consideration being taken, because the next step could be so serious. One other point to make is this Russian response tonight coming out and denying that this explosion had anything to do with Russian missiles. Denials in the past have not been credible, but also saying that many times have not been credible, I should say, but also saying that this is a provocation, accusing Russia of this explosion. But in whose interest is it for NATO to create this provocation? Of course, there are those that would like NATO to be more active, or NATO allies to be more active in terms of defending Ukraine. But it seems a bit of a stretch for this kind of act to be a deliberate provocation on the NATO side. And so it's important as well to look at the way that Russia is responding to this, to see whether those denials are credible. And at the moment, it doesn't sound particularly credible.
Yes, it sounds fascinating that September the 11th was the time that Article 5 was invoked, because certainly the editor of Russia Today, in response to these blasts on Polish soil, had earlier tweeted, Deborah, good evening, 1962, referring there to the era of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But just hearing also from NATO's Jens Stoltenberg, NATO is monitoring the situation in Poland, and allies are closely consulting. You bet they are. Nobody wants to make the wrong decision here.
It's incredibly serious. This is the worst. It's not quite the worst nightmare, but it's a nightmare that all NATO allies have been thinking about ever since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine, remember, crucially, is not a member state, so it does not enjoy the protections of collective defence, collective deterrence that is fundamental to those countries like the UK, like Poland, that are a member of the NATO alliance. But because many of those countries border Ukraine, as soon as Russia started conducting full-scale military attacks on Ukraine, there was, of course, the fear, especially when NATO allies individually started providing weapons to help the Ukrainians, that there could be some escalation, either deliberate or by mistake. And right now, even if this is a mistake, some kind of accidental strike that's hit Polish territory, there is then going to be the risk of a misunderstanding. It's a moment of maximum risk right now. And that's why cool heads and clear information are going to be crucial before anyone is going to want to make the next step.
Deborah, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Further word from the White House National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, who has said that he has spoken with his Polish counterpart after those missile reports. That's according to a statement from the White House. Let's join now the retired General Sir Richard Barrons, former commander of the UK's Joint Forces Command. How seriously should this be taken then? You obviously heard from our security and defence editor there.
Yes, and I absolutely agree with Deborah Haynes that right now is the time for cool heads and the facts, and the facts will be established probably in daylight when the parts of whatever caused this explosion, such as bits of a missile, will be located, and they're relatively easy to identify, and the radar tracks through the sky at the time of the explosion can also be investigated, because the stakes are really high. That if, and it would be extraordinary, Russia had decided to fire a missile into NATO territory, and we should recognize that it's probably unlikely Russia would choose to target a random grain silo in a village with a population of just 400 to start a war with NATO. But if Russia has decided to do that, then then this world of ours is taking a turn that no one could possibly have imagined even a month ago. Far more likely is an explanation that a missile has gone rogue. In other words, it's malfunctioned or it's been deflected and ended up in Poland with tragic consequences. So exactly as your correspondent has described, you need to know what happened, what the intent was behind it, and then people should take a view on it. And I think a sort of international junior school football match whirring up the rhetoric around this right now is deeply unhelpful.
Yes, and I guess there are actually 4 possible explanations if indeed this was related to the Ukraine war. One, as you said, it was deliberate but unlikely. Another is a missile overshoot or gone wrong. The other is that air defense systems had been deployed and this was a remnant part of a missile, or indeed part of the interceptor itself. We know that Ukraine received NASAMS from America. They've got their own S-300s, Ukraine's existing Soviet-era air defense systems. So there are a number of explanations for this. So what does happen now, and how closely will NATO allies consult, do you think? Because this process of verifying what happened is already underway as far as we understand it.
So all eyes will now be on the site of the explosion, and people, experts in the technology, will be looking for missile debris and other debris to identify what it was that has killed these 2 poor souls this evening. And then when they've identified what it was, they can then start to investigate how it got there and maybe what the motive was behind it. And really only when that is clearer, and clear in my view, should the North Atlantic Council and NATO members take a definitive position on this, because to do so beforehand would imply they were prepared to decide on something really significant in the absence of actually knowing the facts. And the other point about this evening is there's this huge attention on this explosion in Poland for very, very good reasons. But the fact is, during the course of today, Russia has fired at least 90 missiles, cruise and ballistic missiles, into Ukraine. That's about $500 million worth of missiles. It's done a lot of damage, not to the military of Ukraine, but to the domestic electricity infrastructure. And that in itself must be clearly a more shocking event than one explosion in a field in Poland.
Well, absolutely. Let's talk about that and the energy crisis now in Ukraine and indeed in its neighbours, Moldova.
Okay. I would carry on with this, but this video wasn't about Ukraine. Wow. So, I agree that we should not panic right now. If it is confirmed either way that it is or is not a Russian missile or Ukrainian anti-air missile, a repellent missile, you know what I mean. I will let you know. I will be coming back on here. This is rather disturbing, though. I don't see the point in Russia doing that. I mean, I don't see the point in Russia trying to take Ukraine in the first place, but still. So yeah, I think we've got to be a bit careful about jumping to conclusions here, instead of just shouting, oh, World War III, like I've been seeing on a couple of chats tonight. Just chill out for a bit. Wait till we've got the actual information before we start all losing our heads. Alright? Okay, this has been Shadow Eater. I'm sorry it's been a long one without a lot of chat from me, but didn't need a lot of chat from me. I just wanted to show you this bit. Again, if I get any more information, I will come back on and relay it and use myself as a medium. So yeah, this has been my dog specking. Good night, everyone. Blessed Thursday.